Hey sis, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sira, and on this channel I create content to help us become our best selves. The goal is to become 1% better every day. Today's topic is something we've all heard before. You're too much. Those three words hold so much power, so today we're going to dive into what it means and how we can navigate through it. Alright, let's dive into it. You're too needy, you're too clingy, you're too much. We've all heard those terms before. But when people say those words to us, it hurts. It plays on our mind and live with us for a very long time, especially if you're on the receiving end. It makes you feel unheard, it makes you question yourself, and it makes you feel unseen. And you start to doubt yourself and start to show up as your authentic self. Because when you show up as your authentic self wasn't fully accepted. So you start to question your every move. If I say this, am I saying too much? If I do this, am I doing too much? Because you didn't meet someone's definition of enoughness. So we've all heard the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will never hurt me. That is so not true. Our words can hurt. Our words can have a lasting impact in people's head and minds. Think about it. You've been in arguments where someone said something to you and their words live on for a very long time. And sometimes you start to ask like, dang, is that true about me? And especially if it's a word that played onto your insecurity, like too much. So let's be mindful of how we talk to one another so that we say things that actually uplift one another rather than tear one another down. And labels like you're too needy, you're too clingy, you're too much tears other people down indirectly. So let's really explore, what does it really mean when someone say you're too much? To me, when people say you're too much, I think what they're really trying to communicate is that you're too much for me to handle. It's important that we call out the for me, because when we think about too much, that is a subjective term. Because to one person, what may be too much may be just right and just enough for that person. So it's the for me element that a lot of people miss when they say, oh, you're too much, or you're too clingy, or you're too needy. It's the for me piece that is missing out of that, because you may be the right fit for another person, but for that particular person, it's just too much for them to handle. They don't have the capacity to handle that behavior or action. It's just overwhelming for them. In reality, we all have our limits and capacity that any of us could handle in any given situation. So I like to think about it using an illustration of a small glass and a big glass. And let's say you have a water bottle. This water bottle, you pour it into the small glass. The small glass, being that it's shorter, will have limited capacity. And if you keep pouring the water into it, it will overspill. That small glass has reached its capacity, and therefore the water becomes too much for that small glass. However, when you have this larger glass, when you take that same water bottle and pour it into the larger glass, it fits right in and it doesn't overspill. The larger glass is a right fit for the water. So if you take a step back, you can see that the water was always enough. It's just when placed in the wrong environment, it overspilled and it became too much. So that's how I want you to think about too much. When you have always been enough, because inherently you don't get your enoughness from external factors. God validated you and made you enough when he created you as a person, right? You've been a human, always been enough. However, when you're placed in the wrong environments and with the wrong type of people, you may become too much for them to handle. Because like I mentioned earlier, every one of us here have our limits and capacity, and we should have a right to those limits and capacities. So for any one of us, certain behaviors, certain actions can be too much for us to handle. So I hold the stance that us as individuals, as humans, is enough, always been enough. However, we can exhibit behaviors and actions that can be too much. So that's an important distinction, because one says, for example, Sarah, you're too much. And the other's like, Sarah, this action or behavior that you're exhibiting is too much. One focuses on the person's identity. So when someone say, oh, you're too much, That's an attack on someone's identity, on someone's character, on someone's personhood. And you're saying who you are in of yourself is too much. Whereas the distinction here is your behavior, your action that you're displaying, it's too much. Which is more of an accurate saying because the behaviors and actions, those are things that can be changed. Whereas when you say the person who, the identity of someone is too much, then you put a stamp on that person and deem them not enough. Is there some truth that people can be too needy, too clingy, or too much? So let's say you're someone who in your past you may have been told you're too needy, you're too clingy, or you're too much. For a second, I just want us to remove the labels because the labels create a form of feeling the need to defend yourself, right? And like I mentioned earlier, you in of yourself, you've always been enough. We're focusing on the action and behaviors. So I do believe that people can have clingy behaviors, needy behaviors that can be overly excessive for some people. And sometimes people need to take a step back and examine and observe their behaviors to see for themselves. So I just want to encourage you like to remove the labels for a second and to go inward and even just think through some of the scenarios where people say, oh, you're too much or you're too needy or you're too clingy. And ask yourself, was my actions and behavior in that situation a little bit too needy, too clingy, or too much, overly excessive? So let's say, for example, someone says they'll give you a call back. Rather than waiting for them to give you a call back, you blow up their phone 10 times. That, my friend, is too much. Because now you're not even respecting the person's need for space. You are literally overly calling them because you cannot allow yourself the space to be away from them. So that's an example of a behavior being too much. So going back to the question, yes, behaviors though, not the individual, can be too much. I believe that at the root of our behaviors and actions that can come up as too much may be areas that we may actually need to heal. And because we haven't healed that parts of ourselves, so sometimes we may act out from our fears, our insecurities, our abandonment wounds, from feeling anxious. If you have an anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, it could be an array of different things that may be manifesting itself in our actions. That may be coming off as too much. So I think it's important that we do the inner work and observe our actions and start to heal because we'll start to realize that those behaviors that may be coming off as too much is really us showing up as our wounded self rather than our authentic self. Because there is a difference between having a need and being needy, or giving or wanting affection and being overly clingy, and having emotion and having a need to like express your emotions and having emotional outbursts. There's a difference, and your behavior sometimes become excessive when you haven't done the work inwardly to really get to know yourself, to heal from things that may have hurt you, and it starts to show up like that. But again, if you've done the work and all of that, just keep in mind that too much is still subjective. What may be too much for one person may be just enough for the other person. So take that with a grain of salt, okay? So may we be mindful of how we use the term too much. May we all come to the realization that people in of themselves as humans, we're all inherently enough. We're never too much. But like I said, our behaviors and actions can be too much. So there's this Bible verse that I really like. It is Ephesians 4:29. It says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." In other words, when you give someone feedback in love. So when you just go and tell somebody, oh, you're too much, that's not giving someone's feedback in love. You're attacking their character. So if you're going to tell someone that their behavior or action that they're exhibiting is excessive and sometimes can be overwhelming, do so in love and not label them with terms like, oh, you're needy, you're too clingy, because honestly, it doesn't help anyone and it doesn't empower that person to want to change or to become a better version of themselves. They just start to overanalyze every action and things that they do to see if it's too needy or too clingy. And quite frankly, if they haven't done the work internally, they don't even know that they're being too needy or too clingy. They're operating from their unhealed self. So I think a way to even have those conversations, going back to that example that I brought up earlier, right? This person who's been calling you 5 times in a row rather than respecting your space after you told them that you give them a call back, rather than telling that person, oh, you're too much, because like I said, that person in of themselves is not too much. The behavior of calling excessively is too much. It's to sit and just have an honest and candid conversation. And it can be something like, hey, I love talking to you, but sometimes when you call me several times after I told you I'll give you a call, it makes me feel suffocated. It makes me feel like you're not respecting my space for my time alone. And it makes me feel like you're constantly in need of my time and attention. And then I start to feel guilty when I'm not giving you my time. But I don't like that feeling because I should be able to take space and come back to you when I'm ready. And I also think that you should be able to give me my space as needed. But I just wanted to create this open space for us to have a conversation so that you can tell me from your perspective what may be going on with you internally. That creates a room to talk about the behavior and to even teach the person the impact of the behavior, because a behavior can be changed. And sometimes we all lack self-awareness in, oh, okay. Sometimes we all lack self-awareness in different areas. So sometimes calling out that behavior to them and sharing the impact of that behavior gives that person the opportunity to learn and to grow and to do something differently. However, because like I said, we're all humans and we all have our limits and capacity, and I really love boundaries. If that person continues to show you that they cannot respect your need for space, then that's where you as a person, it's like, you know what? This behavior is a little bit excessive for me. It's too much for me. It may be enough for another person, but for me, it's too much. And that's where you set your boundary and say, you know what? I'm not going to tolerate that behavior because that's just not something I have the capacity for, right? Doesn't mean that this person has too much, but the behavior is overly excessive for you. And I think that's the important distinction that we all need to continue to make and be mindful of, because we're throwing labels here on people and making people shrink rather than helping them grow as individuals. And I think we all need to become responsible for communicating the impact that people's behavior have on us, and those on the receiving end need to take responsibility that sometimes their actions and behaviors can be excessive, and that's something that they need to work on. So yeah, that's what I think. But if you ever been labeled too much, too needy, too clingy, because I believe we all have, we may not want to talk about it because those words carry some stigma and no one wants to feel like they're too much, they're too needy, they're too clingy. But sis, we've all been labeled that. So I would love to hear your version of your story in the comment. Share with me how you navigated through that. And if this resonates with you, because this is my take on the label too much. I would love to hear your take on the label too much, too needy, too clingy, and to hear your perspective for us to have an open dialogue where we all can grow and learn different perspective. Again, thank you all so much for watching. Love to hear from you all as well. I'll see you guys next week.